I think that was the most important thing in my life, this education I got at Cody, which opened up my heart, if you want to say, and my mind, to become more adventurous, to be more brave, to be more adventurous, and to go out and do things that other people weren't doing, especially as an Indian, you know? Kind of growing, so it wasn't an interest where I was just focused from the beginning to, you know, become some sort of flamenco artist or something, because I've never had an interest to become a flamenco artist per se, but it just happened just naturally.
Mountain where I come from, filled with happy, innocent days. There's a river inside my heart, yeah, and it shows me the way. I have traveled over oceans, many lands and people I have seen. And in every corner of the globe, dear, every human being seems the same. I have traveled, oh, I have traveled through darkness but light I have seen. And there is something you must remember, that in life nothing remains the same. So stay with me, alright, please, where the water was never run dry. Stay with me, alright, please, where blue oceans of Texas never die. Stay with me, alright, please, in green mountains of Cody Canal. Stay with me, alright, please, a place in my heart that's always in the now. I believed in golden gateways. I even believed in stars that never shine. I even traveled time and distance, but never touched the universal skies. Have good judgment, be not judgmental, and point not your finger and blame. For in every corner of the globe, dear, every human being seems the same. I have traveled, oh, I have traveled through darkness, but life I have seen. And there is something you must remember, that in life nothing remains the same. So stay with me, oh baby, please, where the water wells never run dry. Stay with me, oh baby, please, where blue oceans of Texas never die. Stay with me, oh baby, please, in green mountains of Cody Canal. Stay with me, oh baby, please, a place in my heart that's always now.
Hello, I'm Megha Vinesh from the KIS class of 2021, and with me today is Oliver Rajamani. Oliver is a graduate from the class of 1990, and he's been an entertainer from a young age. His musical and artistic talents are fondly remembered by all of his classmates, and he's no stranger to the Kodi community. Today, he supports the Romani people and their culture and their art through his individual project called Flamenco India, his one of a kind brainchild that explores the Indian roots of flamenco music. In addition, Oliver is also trained in both Western and Indian classical music, as well as the tabla. Prior to his musical ventures, Oliver worked with the United Nations Romani Congress, where he pursued Middle Eastern music along with studying the plight of the Romani and Dom people. It was here that he really fostered his passion for the plight of the Romani people. Thank you for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here. To begin with,
Yeah.
I wanted to speak about your choice of art form. What provoked your interest in flamenco in particular? And can you tell us a little more about the nuances of the art form and why it holds such a special?
Well, flamenco. So flamenco is something I, to be honest with you, really didn't know anything about when I was in Cody. Uh, and I really learned about flamenco when I arrived in New York.
Mhm.
And so uh, flamenco wasn't something I was looking for or anything like that. I had no interest in it in the beginning. Um, I was um, performing with a lot of different um, types of music, which were mostly kind of like folk, American folk music and rock and roll and things like that. And I was in the university choir at Long Island University. Um, and I was in the orchestra there, and I was doing a lot of things like that. But I was so I was living in Long Island, and I'd go into the city, New York City, to do gigs. And so while I was going in there to do gigs, I would run into people, a lot of different musicians. And once I was uh, playing my tabla at this place, and a gentleman walked over and he said, "Wow, you're from India, I assume?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, my great grandfathers and all, they all came from India too. So I'm actually Indian." And I was like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And then he started talking about flamenco and the history. But that's how I got into the musical aspect of flamenco. Uh, but before I got into the musical aspect of flamenco, I was already involved in um, Romani studies. Um, Romani studies, the study of gypsy culture and music and things like that, and history. And so kind of these two kind of led me into it. So it wasn't something I was looking for, I was interested in, or anything. It's just that simultaneously the Romani studies and the music came together, um, just through people, meeting people and being in the music circle in New York. And I ended up performing with lots of flamenco artists in New York, and especially a flamenco guitar player called Arturo Martinez, who kind of really took me and kind of encouraged me to study or perform flamenco, and play with flamenco artists, because he felt that flamenco's roots come from India, and the Romani roots come from India, and it was important that I should get involved in that. And so for a long time, I kind of was involved and kind of wasn't. I had so much going on in my life at that time. And so my interest was kind of half and half. I did stuff with my friend Arturo, and then I would get hired by different groups to perform. And I did a bunch of fusion kind of stuff, which was a mixture between flamenco and Indian. And where I would perform percussion like tabla, or sing a folk song from India, and then the flamenco artist would dance and play guitar and things like that. So while all this was going on, I just started picking up the music, slowly, and I started to see how similar flamenco, or how easy it was to sing a song from India, and how it was easy to play it on a flamenco guitar, and how certain technicalities of flamenco seem to really fit well with Indian technicalities. And so as I was going through this process of learning, as well as through observing and meeting with artists, and being hired by different companies, whether they were artists from Spain or just in New York or wherever, um, I started, that interest started kind of growing. So it wasn't an interest where I was just focused from the beginning to become some sort of flamenco artist or something, because I've never had an interest to become a flamenco artist per se. But it just happened just naturally. And
Speaking of, you mentioned that there were certain technicalities in flamenco that were really similar to the technicalities of Indian classic music and so on. How would you describe the flamenco scene in India, if there is any? And How would you describe your efforts in kind of integrating or creating those fusions that you do with flamenco and Indian classical music?
So first of all, as far as a flamenco scene in India, I mean, I know that there are some people doing flamenco, and I know that I think in Bombay maybe there's a few artists trying to, do things. So I'm not very familiar with the flamenco scene in India. I mean, I've interacted here and there with some people, um, but you know, uh, so uh, so my journey in flamenco is very different. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't come into flamenco with the focus that I was going to become a flamenco artist, and I still don't have that. You know, I don't pursue that idea. I still don't. I don't consider myself a flamenco artist. Um, my and the reason is because I've been exposed to so much culture and music, and flamenco is just one part of that. And so in my going to these technicalities and things like that you were asking about, um, there's a lot of um, so first of all, uh, when I was talking about flamenco, people pursuing flamenco, and then my life, there are some people who are just pursuing flamenco because they want to learn it and they want to be perfect at it, and they want to get every little hand gesture and everything perfect to the T. So they're really pursuing that art form, and I'm not pursuing that art form. Rather, I'm just kind of, it's almost like I'm a bridge. I serve as a bridge, and I bring uh, the not just the music but the history, and I'm telling more of a historic story, rather than just playing technically perfect. So there's more in this music called Flamenco India that I'm doing than just playing perfectly flamenco music. And and so what I've done is, like when I've technically I've taken many rhythms in flamenco, and you'll see that many rhythms, for example, there's a rhythmic structure in North Indian classical music, which is called tihais, and they have different compositions, and the dancers, Kathak dancers and stuff, do different footwork, and they always end like this. And these are very similar to flamenco. You have the same kind of rhythmic structures called llamadas in flamenco, where the dancer ends like that. So a lot of these kind of structures are very similar, you'll find in classical Indian music. But there's a lot of similarities also in folk music, because the Romani people are not necessarily because classical Indian music does have some sort of hierarchy in India, but the Romani people's history is a lot more folk and tribal oriented from India. So when you go into these cultures, folk traditional cultures, you can hear certain chants, very ancient chants. For example, one of the most amazing chant is called the Opari, which comes from Tamil Nadu, and it's just like a wailing of singing with no instrumentation, and it's really done during death, in Tamil Nadu. But in flamenco singing, you have the same thing called cante hundo, which is purely just voice, and it's a very pure gypsy or Romani way of singing. So cante hundo, the most similar thing that can be found is really um, in southern India, where they sing Opadi, and it's very, very similar, the approach to it and the concept of it. So anyway, so coming back to your question, there's a lot of these kind of technicalities I've drawn from, and I've just created my own journey. And again, I'm not trying to be a flamenco artist, and I'm not wanting to be one.
Another
Yeah.
aspect about your work that I was really interested with was your work with the UN Romani Congress. How did that happen? How did you land the job? And how instrumental has your work with the UN been in, sort of establishing that connection you have today with the Romani people and their culture?
Again, uh, the job, like I was saying earlier, it's the same situation here. I wasn't looking for a job with the UN. I ended up being in this situation just through contacts and friends and musicians and professionals and stuff like that. So I was, so the very beginning of this whole thing starts with being in the university, and my teacher, anthropology teacher, gave me a book, and she said, you should really read this book. I mean, this is something that relates to you, where you're from, your culture, everything, and no one knows about this, and especially people from India, and you should really, get into this. And the book's name was called The Road of the Gypsies. And so when I saw this book, I mean, I had no interest. I didn't come to America to, study about gypsy culture. I took it home and I read it a few times, and then I put it down and read it. But it took me a while, to form an interest in this, because being an immigrant, I was more into doing something that wasn't so in Indian. I could have just stayed in India if I wanted to. So it took me a while, and as I started reading more and more, it talked about the history of the people, the tribes in India, all this stuff in India, and all of a sudden I started really getting more and more involved in it. And as I was getting more involved in it, I started meeting different Romani musicians, but also people involved in human rights organizations and things like that. And I ended up meeting the UN ambassador, Dr. Ian Hancock, who was actually the author of that book my teacher gave me. And I met him at an event in New York. And anyway, so I got introduced to all these Romani people and community and everything, and I ended up being involved in it because one of the things for Romani people, at least in that organization, was they were really trying to, have an Indian form of representation to show their history, culture, and all that kind of stuff, where it's coming from. So I was involved for about 4 years. I worked with a Romani Roma person from Hungary, Mr. Shandor Balog, and I was really involved with the Romani community, and it was very fascinating for me, because I was never had no interest in this or anything in the beginning, or not that I didn't have an interest. It wasn't in my world, it wasn't something I was even thinking about.
Taking a few steps back in your journey and coming where you are today, um in Cody you were kind of referred to as the Elvis of Kodaikanal according to your yearbook. What sort of activities did you get involved with in school, and do you think exposing yourself to a wide variety of music styles and cultures kind of prompted your love for the kind of work that you do today?
uh, yeah, so um, the when I was in Cody, so the one thing that always was there was music for me. I was also a painter. I did a lot of paintings. Um, was involved in a lot of sports, and um, so yeah, the arts were always kind of a big part of my life, and really music was pretty much sometimes I feel the one thing that really got me through school in many ways, because it was very it rooted me in something and gave me a sense of um, solidity within myself. Uh, I mean, I wasn't necessarily academically, I should say, I wasn't necessarily, amazing at academics or anything, but I got through somehow. And uh, yeah, but I think the whole thing of culture and your question about culture and being involved in all this music and everything is that one thing which is very different in a Cody school is that at that time, especially, when I was going to school there, Indian families didn't, you know, to come from an Indian family, most families didn't want their kid to be a musician. A lot of them just kind of, they're the normal thing for an Indian family is just kind of you get a job, you go to school, you get a job, you have family, and blah blah blah. That's pretty much it. But with Cody's education, for me, there's a very different a philosophical approach to it, right? It's all about there's a sense of adventure, a sense of learning, a sense of wanting to know something, and not just saying, okay, well, I got my A grade now I'm going to go and get a job. And so I think that was the most important thing in my life, this education I got at Cody, which opened up my heart, if you want to say, and my mind, to become more adventurous, to be more brave, to be more adventurous, and to go out and do things that other people weren't doing, especially as an Indian. So so that so that was the first thing. But then after that, what followed was another experiential opening for me, which was the university which I went to, college. It was called Friends Work Program, and actually I got into that university through Cody School, through the help of the counselor there, and that was another experiential learning process where they had centers all over the world, because it was a Quaker college, and they believed in experiential studies, which meant that you actually went and worked with your teacher, whether it was at their home, you lived at their home, or you not only just learned how to play an instrument well, but you learned about the way someone would live, how their daily life was, the spiritual culture around it. So there was a lot more involved in music than just learning how to play an instrument perfectly. So all this kind of started in Cody School. That's what changed my life, because uh, you know, I mean, going back even to my family, I mean, most of my family just regular Indians with regular jobs, and and I'm the only one very different because of my education that I got. So Cody education was a big thing for me. It changed my whole life, and opened my mind and heart to being, if you want to say, fearless, and to experience life fully.
I mean, I think that sort of a sense that you mentioned about Cody kind of, forcing people to really experience things and think out of the box. I think that's something that I can relate to from my own Cody experience, because I saw myself progressively just becoming more fearless and learning how to balance the different aspects of my life. And it's also true because as Indians, a lot of the time we tend to put ourselves in a certain very traditional box that just prevents a lot of us from, achieving our fullest potentials in the sort of fields that as a culture we collectively tend to not value as much as we do the more academic side of fields. So I think the sort of work that you're doing, and the sort of support that Cody's given you, it seems absolutely brilliant. And I think we're very lucky to have alumnus like you that kind of, you know aren't afraid to break out of the mold that we've kind of set as a culture. One more question that I had about Cody was, do you recall any specific teachers having a large influence on you and kind of inculcating your love for music?
Yeah, yeah, there were quite a few teachers. Um, so obviously, coming to the music aspect of it, my first teacher was Mr. Dion, Keith Dion, and I studied percussion with him, snare drum and stuff. And he really got me, going on learning how to play marching drums and stuff like that. And I mean, he was. I look back and I feel bad because like I used to drive him crazy because we had to read notes in orchestra and stuff and marching band, and I would I I would always play the marching stuff, but then I would add my own stuff to it and jazz it up and do all kinds of things, and he'd go crazy. He'd be like, "What are we gonna do with you, man?" you know, and so yeah, so Mr. Dion was one, and then after that was as I got older, Mr. Pickard, Alfred Pickard, Bonnie Bell Pickard, um, Peggy Jenks, Mrs. Jenks. They were all my music teachers, so they all had a big, effect on my life. And um, I mean, I went through all the, I was in jazz band, I was in regular band, marching band, I was in choir, and um, so those are the music teachers who I was involved with in school. And but I was also involved with some other musicians outside of school, but actually who were part of the school, but kind of in and out. One of them was John Holmes and Sandy Holmes, and Sandy was actually an art teacher for me when I was little, and her husband had a band. They were from Canada, and they had a rock band, and I used to go and play with them, and I toured with them, and some of my friends. We had a band called Wild Child rock band, and they were very kind of inspirational in that band. Um, and then but outside of music, there was a my English teacher. His name was Philip Daly, and he was very interesting. I was very kind of had a good relationship with him, and he was a interesting English teacher. The first day of class, when we were new, he would get on top of the desks and just walk around on the desktops, reading out poetry and things like this. Anyway, so he used to give me CDs, all kinds of different music and books and philosophies and things like that. And he introduced me to like the Doors, the band called the Doors, and all these kind of so he was one. And there's been quite a Raj Kumar, who was my art teacher. He was I hung out at the art room a lot because I used to paint a lot, and that was one of my big hangouts at his place. And it's just different people like that. But those names are some of the names I remember from school who were slightly kind of different in kind of having a more particular relationship with me.
That's that's nice. I think it's really nice how the teachers in Cody kind of provided you with the sort of environment that you really needed to foster, like not only your skills but also just your interest in the subject. But again,
Yeah,
going back to what you
actually,
said.
there's one more person. person called Marlenka Gray, who I actually and her son Ashaman, and who I stayed with them for a little bit,
Mhm.
and that was a beautiful experience of learning certain things about America and culture and things like that. So
One thing that I picked up on in your previous answer was your rock band, The Wild Child, a very apt name. When I was going through your yearbook, I came across um, these few snippets of a bare-chested show that you played in the canteen. If you don't mind, could you tell those of us who are unfortunate enough to have missed the event, what was that all about? Just so we can get a better idea of how you were in Cody.
wow, I didn't even realize it was in the school UP. Uh, that's funny. Um, well, yeah, it was. I'm trying to think. It was an interesting show, So we used to have this band called Wild Child, and we played all kinds of rock music mainly, and it was at the KMU, the old KMU, and and it was usually for canteen night, and people would be going crazy, and uh, all I remember, I guess, from that evening was it was really jam packed in there, and because I remember it wasn't just school kids that were there. There were people from, just Cody um, community who were there too, and it was really jam packed and it was really hot. So I remember starting to do my solo, and I guess it was part of my act too, because I really got into it. And when I got into solos back then, I mean, I would just, because it's kind of like almost like you go into a different zone, when you play drums and stuff. And yeah, I just, to be honest with you, I actually don't hear. I mean, I remember me bare chested and all that, but I don't remember how it came off. To be honest with you, I guess it just kind of like my mind went blank and it just happened. but but yeah, it was um yeah, what can I say? I was a wild child. I was
Right,
part of the wild child band.
right,
And
very aptly titled.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was fun days. I remember, uh, canteens were a lot of fun, and especially those concerts. And we did a lot of concerts, not just in school, but also outside, in
Mhm.
school. And it was it was an amazing experience to be in, in this little town, beautiful kind of heavenly place, tucked away from the whole world, and then to be meeting all these people from around the world, students, and to be playing all this music, American rock and roll music. I mean, there was no connection for me as to the culture of where it was coming from and everything, but it was just I was just in when I would play, I just got into a very particular zone. I just forgot everything, and I just went into myself, and the shirt came off.
Right, because Cody still kind of carries that very strong relationship that it has with, music and the community as a whole and the Saturday night activities. So just when I read your yearbook and I read about this, I was like, oh, okay, this is something that I want to know more about. Back to the work you do. Recently, you collaborated with a former teacher and guitarist, Mr. Matthew Joseph, who's in Australia, and that produced some really amazing work. Could you tell us a little bit more about, the experience of collaborating virtually through music and what it sort of involves to make that sort of collaboration?
Uh, well, yeah. Uh, so Matthew, we were all in a band together, he was part of this Wild Child band too, and 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 we would work together. So yeah, it was really great to connect with him, and especially during this pandemic, we were able to keep in touch and work on this song. Um, and I mean, it was kind of interesting because I'm not much of a technology person. I've never been much of a technology person. So when the pandemic hit, it was challenging for me because I had to learn different technical things, like on the computer and all kinds of other stuff, recording things and stuff like that. And but it ended up being actually a real nice thing at the end, because I ended up really forcing myself. Well, I had no choice. I had to learn this stuff. And so once I learned it and I was start getting involved in it, it's been fun. I mean, through this pandemic, I've been doing recordings at home and doing talks, online talks, um, workshops and things like this. um, and it's been interesting, but it's also been challenging because it's very different, when you're um, uh, I'm used to recording, going into a studio and recording in person, and working with artists who are already there, and everything is very organically done. And so this was a new experience for me to work with Matt. He's in Australia and I'm in Austin, Texas. And we talked regularly over Zoom and Zoom chat and stuff like that. And he would send his recorded files to me, and then I would sit at home and put those files into my computer and just record it. I mean, it's pretty simple now, pretty much everybody does it. Um, so it's been interesting, to be honest with you. It's been a very creative process, and I enjoy working with Matt. I mean, his music, I mean, he's such a gifted musician, and so, I mean, he's amazing, so technically so pure with his technique, as a guitar player. It's amazing. And so, um, and he's always inspired with new songs and new ways of looking at whether it's music or life and things like that. So I love chatting with him. So we keep in touch, but yeah, it's just it's been it's weird for me to do stuff like this, online, but it's just the way it is. And um, I I really wouldn't want to do this if we didn't have the pandemic, but to be honest with you, I've been forced to do it. So I've made it an enjoyable experience. I could just say that, you know.
True, because the pandemic has really changed a lot, about the way we kind of interact with different people. And I'm sure it's probably had a lot of impact on the music industry, because for an artist like yourself, and I think for an art form like flamenco, where it really requires that you connect with people, or even any other music form for that matter, I think for a lot of artists, playing virtually just doesn't capture the sort of essence that playing, in a live studio, or being with your co-performer, or being with your kind of audience would involve. But finally, just closing off, I wanted to kind of hear a little bit about the piece that you're going to share with us today, its history, its importance, and what you think us listeners should really be looking forward to about it.
Okay, so the song you're going to hear, um, the one we picked is called Paso Panori. It's a traditional Romani song. It's actually a song by an artist called Vera Bila, who's a Romani. She passed away, but she was a well-known Romani artist from Eastern Europe, and 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 it's just a song. It's a simple song. It's just like a little love song kind of thing. This guy's saying, "Oh, mom, I met this girl down by the river. She's so beautiful. I want to marry her. Will you ask um, for her hand?" Because in Romani culture, um, the weddings, marriages, and stuff are still arranged. And a lot of the cultural aspects in Romani culture is still very Indian, even though they've been in Europe for hundreds of years. They still carry on the Indian traditions, whether it be in marriage or even in religious traditions. There's a lot of crossovers where they've adopted Christianity or maybe Islam or wherever, but mostly Christianity in Europe, and they have somehow converted the Hindu traditions over to the Christian tradition, in so they're worshiping Christ, but more in a more kind of, you could say, Indian Hindu way or something like that. So there's a lot of things like that. So anyway, so the song is just a very traditional song, and but the way they traditionally play this song is different. It's a little more like Eastern European and more jazz oriented. That's the way they play it. But I changed the rhythm to more of a rumba flamenco rhythm. And so I'm playing it in a more rumba flamenco style. And rumba flamenco is more, it's from Spain. And rumba is actually a rhythm from Africa. So, it was adopted into flamenco as the Spanish settlers from South America, they were coming back to Spain. They had brought slaves from Africa to South America, so they were being influenced by all these rhythms. So the rumba came through these people into Spain, and the Romani communities adopted that, and it's become a popular style of music. The most popular style of this, the popular band of this style is called Gypsy Kings, and they made it very popular. But that rumba style really is a African style. Its roots are African, but the Romani communities just adopted it. So anyway, so that's the rhythm and the style I'm playing it in, rumba flamenco.
That's really interesting. I think everyone's probably looking forward to hearing the piece, and we definitely hope we can see more of you in the future. But thank you so much for your time and for just sharing all of this with us today. It was really nice to learn about, your journey at Cody School and how the school's influenced so many artists such as yourself. And I'm sure like you've sparked an interest in flamenco music and brought a lot of us to establish connections that we never really thought were possible till this conversation with you. And we really look forward to progressing, to like your career progressing and just following you as that happens. We'll now close this interview by listening to some of the video recordings that you've provided. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Maria.